Probably everyone here this morning can remember one of those great little songs that we learned probably when you were in Sunday school when you were a wee little child. It was a song that you learned about that wee little man. You remember that song? Sing it with me. Sing it with me. Zaccheus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Savior passed that day, he looked up in the tree, and he said, Zaccheus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. For I'm going to your house today. So several of you sing that. That's one of those you learned when you were a little child, I'm sure. And I would venture to say that most in this building this morning could give a very good summary of what you read in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, because of that little song. It gives the details of what Luke wrote about a very famous incident in the life of Jesus Christ. And it's a cool story when you think about it. It's a little guy named Zaccheus, a little bitty guy who climbed up in a tree to see Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not much of a great climber. I'm just not, I never have been. Even when I was in shape, and yes, there was a time when I was in shape and much thinner than I am now and could do stuff. Even when I housed tobacco, I was the one that handed up because I was not a good climber. I was one who couldn't make it up a tree very well unless I had a makeshift ladder or something like that, but still. There were times when I shimmied up a tree for one reason or another to get on those low branches when I was much younger. So my question is, though, why would Luke have this story about a man named Zaccheus? Well, if you remember, what was Luke's profession? He was a doctor. And what is a doctor? What is their mindset? They're usually very analytical and detail-oriented. And he was one of these persons that was precise in recording the life of Christ. And I believe there could be several reasons, and I firmly believe that there are lessons that can be learned in this story of Zaccheus that go much deeper than what that little children's song says. It's a story of a big faith from a wee little man. And it can teach us greatly today. I want you to remember this morning to never let anything hinder you in your relationship with Jesus Christ. This morning, or this month rather, in January, I've been having a series of messages. Pursuing Christ, or pursuing holiness, pursuing relationships, pursuing holiness, pursuing God. All about pursuing what we do. This morning, pursue Christ. Never let anything hinder that relationship with Jesus Christ. I want you to take your Bibles or follow along on the screen. Luke chapter 19. I'm going to read as we go along this morning. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 4. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zaccheus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Zaccheus showed a real big faith to see Jesus, did he not? It's easy to let things get in our way of our relationship with Jesus Christ. It's easy to let things get between us and Christ. They might be good things, our dreams, our jobs, our pleasures, even our families can come between us and our relationship with Jesus. There's nothing wrong with anything I mentioned there, is there? But can those things come between us and our relationship with Jesus? Very much so. They can be good things. They can be things that are not so good. We might face opposition and we don't want to face it. It might be a spiritual problem we don't want to address or get rid of. It might be peer pressure. It's easy sometimes to become timid and wonder what other people would think. And there are some lessons here in this story of Zaccheus. It's not just a little children's story. It's a story of big faith. Big faith and a big desire to see Jesus Christ. There's some really strong lessons I want you to remember this morning. Zaccheus was a man who lived in the city of Jericho, and this was a main town on the road between Jerusalem and what was known as Transjordan. Now, archaeologists go over there and they dig up and try to find out things. And archaeological digs reveal that this was a very wealthy town. Jericho was a very wealthy town. And it's one that had an international flavor. Because at the time of Christ, it was known as a kind of a resort town for both Jews and Gentiles. Remember I said it was on the main road? You know, even today when you're on the main road, there are towns that are economic centers because of people traveling through. Because so many caravans pass through there. It was an important center for collecting taxes. Now, Zaccheus was a publican, and which was what? He was a tax collector. He was a tax collector. Now, how many of us in here like the tax man? I didn't think I'd see any. Some of you are laughing because that's almost a stupid question. Nobody likes the tax man. How many of you in here consider April 15th your favorite day of the year? Well, I wish some of y'all could see the expressions I'm seeing right now. Because they're funny. They're funny. But folks, nobody likes to pay taxes, especially more than you want to. In ancient times, the people hated the tax collectors even worse than today. Because Luke called Zaccheus the chief tax collector. Which is the only time in the Bible that this is mentioned. At least that's what one of my study books said. I didn't look it up and make sure about that. But who was the chief tax collector? My belief is that he was probably some kind of a supervisor and had people under him. He might have been the head over an area, maybe like what we call today a regional manager. I don't know exactly what he did, but he was called the chief tax collector. What we do know is that in those days, people thought of tax collectors even worse than we do today because these were people who often resorted to extortion. If you wanted to talk about corruption in the first century, who did you talk about many times? It was the tax collectors. They had full authority of Rome behind them, so the tax collector could shake down an individual or a business by threats. They could collect more tax money that was actually owed, and then what would they do? They would keep it, put it in their own pockets. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew that was what was going on. But you know what the problem was? Nobody could do anything about it. And that's why tax collectors were so despised. Now, apparently this tax collector knew Jesus was coming to town, and he wanted to see Jesus. What do we say? Zaccheus was a what? Wee little man. What does that mean? He was short. He was short. Now, we can identify with that. I'm not overly short. If you look on my medical records, they say 5'10", but I'm actually a little bit lower, a little shorter than that. About 5'9", I think 5'9 3/4 is what they actually measured me last time. That's not overly short, but I'm about average, maybe just a little below. I'm not a giant. And when I spend money to buy tickets to a ball game or to a concert. You know what my nightmare is? Getting behind somebody that's 6'7", or getting behind a woman that still wears a beehive. The last concert that Stephanie and I attended was in December, and we were at Renfro Valley, and the guy that sat in front of us, he had to be 6'5". I was doing this the whole time I was there. Thing was, the person sitting next to him was about 6'3", and so it was just a nightmare, you might say. You can be somewhere in the back or in a crowd. Sometimes you can't see. So how many of us have been in those situations that you can identify with Zaccheus? You've wanted to see something and you can't. Folks, I can identify with that very well. So he climbed up in what was called a sycamore fig tree. Not like the sycamore today. It was one that they had over in the Middle East today. And in Israel it grows to about 30 to 40 feet. But it's strong enough to hold a man. So Zaccheus got up there. What does that say to us today? You know, I can talk all I want about what happened to Zaccheus and about him. What does it say to you? What kind of faith do we have to see Jesus, or be part of our worship experience, or be part of the church, or be sharing together? You know, the word you hear a lot today is post-COVID. You've heard that term many times. Back in 2020, in March of 2020, when COVID really blew up, it turned our world upside down. And I can remember exactly my reaction when it came down that the government said, we're going to shut down the churches. And by the way, again, I've said this before. You all told me y'all never did shut down. Very good. Very good. But as soon as the government was saying that, I was livid. I said, they cannot do that. And by the way, the courts have since ruled, yeah, they weren't supposed to do that. But I said, they cannot do it. And I was angry. Do you know anybody else that was angry when they said the churches should shut down? I was very angry. I was angry about it. But you know, after I cooled off and I started talking with other preachers, and a lot of them just didn't know what to do, because we'd never been in that situation before. We started using technology a little bit. It wasn't the same, but yeah, we could have somewhat of a substitute. And for 3 months, I did nothing but preach online. That was what we did. One thing I remember distinctly about early in COVID pandemic, sometime in March of 2020, one Sunday morning, the internet servers were shut down because they were overloaded with people watching services on the internet. That was amazing to me. Personally, I had weeks over 100 people watching on YouTube, which I still do. I still film and put them on YouTube, in addition to our live service that we have here. And one Sunday, I remember, or several Sundays, I had over 100 people that watched. And I got emails and messages from people all over the world. And that was so good. But eventually that became a novel way of worshiping, and what was good became people started using to get away from being with God's people. And we had much less interaction. Make sure that we make time to be with the Lord. Make sure that that's a part of your life. What about your daily time? I haven't spoken as much about that as I should probably. Finding time. You know, I don't know if you're like me. I'm busy. I'm retired. I sometimes think I'm more busy now than I was when I was working. I wasn't working 40 hours a week, about 60 hours, 60 to 70. But sometimes you get caught up in things and you say, wait a minute, I forgot. You know what I found? You just have to discipline yourself to make time. Make time. What about that? All I'm talking about is this. How big is our faith? How big is our desire? Zaccheus was a short little man. What would have been easy for Zaccheus to do? It would have been easy for him to say, there's a big crowd here, I'm short, I'll go back home. What did he do? He got up high where he could see. Where's our faith? Where's our desire? Where's our desire? We might not be in the same situation as Zaccheus. We might not have to climb a tree to hear a sermon. Now, if you want to do that, that's okay. We'll go outside sometime and I'll preach and you can climb all the trees you want. But like Zaccheus, we might have obstacles to overcome. Don't let Satan win. Zaccheus didn't let Satan win. Zaccheus showed a real big faith. But he also showed a real big faith to host Jesus. He showed a real big faith to seek Jesus, and he showed a real big faith to host Jesus. In the children's song, this is the cool point, I think. Anytime you get a bunch of kids together to sing that song, Zaccheus, if you get to the end, all of them are going to be doing, they're going to be pointing their fingers on all that. I will almost guarantee it. They say, you come down. I think that actually captures what this scripture is saying. Look at what we read. Luke chapter 19. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zaccheus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he is gone to be the guest of a sinner. You know, there's some things in that little story about Zaccheus that we sing about that we just don't capture. I wonder how much surprise was in the people's eyes when Jesus called out to Zaccheus, when Jesus called out to the tax collector. At the time, the people saw Jesus as a religious leader, and the Jewish people said the tax collectors worked for Rome. They were bad people. We're not going to get along with them. We don't want anything to do with them. Jesus not only said, Zaccheus, what else did he say? I'm going to your house. I'm coming into your house. He would be going to the home of one that everyone considered corrupt, everyone considered a sinner. Jesus risked his reputation with the crowd by calling on Zaccheus, and he showed he loved the man but hated the sin. Jesus said, Zaccheus, come down. I love you. I hate the sin that you do. He showed that our love wasn't determined by somebody's status, by their wealth or their social status. Now you think about it. Among the Jewish people, it was unheard of for a religious leader to do what Jesus had done. They thought he was lowering himself, maybe even polluting himself by staying in the house of a tax collector. Look at those last things he said. Verse 7. He has gone to be what? The guest of a sinner. My question is, how do we host Jesus? How do we host him? Obviously, it's not physically, but does our home reflect Jesus Christ? Does our lifestyle reflect Jesus Christ? Do we gladly follow Jesus? Look at, starting at verse 8, Luke chapter 19. But Zaccheus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. You see, Zaccheus showed a big faith to seek the Lord. He showed a big faith to host the Lord. And the last thing I want to give you this morning, he showed a real big faith to show or to share Jesus. He showed a real big faith to share Jesus. He was transformed. What is a transformation? What is a transformation? It's a totally different attitude. Totally different attitude. What do you see Zaccheus doing? It's a total transformation. We live in a world where we hear the word revolution a lot. You hear that constantly if you watch the news. We're going to have some kind of revolution. Some people want to make that where they're taking over the country or whatever. But even if they do so, there's people that are not going to follow along with them. That's not a true revolution. What is a true revolution? It's a radical change. That was Zaccheus. Here was a man who was a rich man. And riches often separate men from God. You know, one thing I would love to find out is, what did Jesus say to Zaccheus in his house? I don't know. What did he say to Zaccheus in his house? Here's what we do know. Even before he went to his house, Zaccheus said to Jesus, I will give half my goods. I'm going to give half my goods to the poor. Now, Jewish tradition, at least in my study I've run across, that Jewish tradition said that if you were wealthy, you gave 20% to the wealth, or to the poor. You didn't stop at just 10% tithe. You gave 20%. Now, he said, I'm going to give half of it. We don't know if that would have made Zacchaeus a poor man or not. My guess is it probably wouldn't have. But you know, that's not the issue. The issue is Zacchaeus went and did even more than what was expected. He gave half. He said, I'm going to pay back fourfold those I have cheated. He said, if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Some translations will give that word that Zaccheus used when he says cheated, when he said cheated. Some translations say defrauded. My Greek study book uses the word blackmail. All of them are corrupt. All of them are wrong. And what did he say? He said, I'm going to pay you back fourfold. Now, he was meeting a legal requirement, but obviously his motivation was to follow Jesus Christ. Can you imagine that today? But then you go on and you look back up here. Go back to our slide that had the there you go. You look at that last verse there. Jesus said to him, salvation has come to this house because this man too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. All right, you can come back to the next there. Jesus said, I've come to seek and save the lost. He's saying Zacchaeus had been a sinful man. Now things were different. Salvation had come. The whole thing comes down to this, is when Jesus comes into someone's life and gains authority there, our selfishness and dishonesty can be eradicated. What happened to Zacchaeus? It was a total transformation, total revolution. Look at what happened to Zacchaeus. He scrambled out of the tree. He stood before Jesus in faith. He showed tangible evidence of his conversion. It was a complete transformation. It was a complete transformation. What about you? What about you? If you're a Christ follower, there needs to be tangible evidence in your life. Your transformation might not be as drastic as that of Zacchaeus, but your life should show it in your talk and in your actions and all that you do. Folks, we live in a hate-filled society. And it's easy sometimes to just want to get involved in that and come up with smart aleck remarks and show that same kind of thing. There's times when I want to say things And Stephanie will say to me, she'll say, be nice. But you know, sometimes it's hard. It's hard to be nice sometimes. But, you know, we have to have that complete transformation. You know, one thing I found is the more I discipline myself to be nice, the more it comes natural to me. Instead of being in that hateful society that we live in, we need to be generous. We need to live as the world demands, or as the Word demands. Live as the Word of God demands. And share the gospel. I wonder how many people Zaccheus told about Jesus Christ. But here was a man that was a sinful man. He climbed up in a tree to see Jesus. Jesus called him down, and we're told he got out of that tree gladly. I just wonder how many people he told about Jesus. Share the gospel. Oftentimes we talk about you're the only Bible people will read, and walking the walk of Jesus Christ, and rightly so. We should do those things. And all those things are true, but we still need to share the gospel. You know, a couple of weeks ago we watched the movie The Blind. And the scene that spoke to me more than any other in that movie, if you were here watching it, the scene that spoke to me in that movie was Phil Robertson owned a bar. And he was a man who, as people were praying for him, he didn't want anything to do with all that. And there was a scene where the local preacher went into the bar and confronted him and just basically showed him his love. And what's really interesting, if you have the video or the DVD and the extra things that we didn't show, there's an interview with that preacher about the day that he went in there. And it was really interesting. That scene stuck out to me. Why? Because that preacher went where the sinners were to share the gospel. That stuck out. We have to share the gospel. Now, when I was growing up, that often meant for the preacher to go to talk to someone, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have somebody that you want me to go see, please let me know. I'm here for you, and I will be glad to do so. Some have mentioned people to me. Unfortunately, some of those people do not respond to me at all, and you know, that happens. But the fact is, the best way to share the gospel is not just by calling on your preacher, but what's the best way to share the gospel? Each person. Each person doing it. Friends telling friends. You know, here at Mackville, today we're hurting because, you know, we've lost a loved one here in the congregation. We've got a lot of people that are sick. This virus I don't think I've ever seen a winter like this. And folks, it's not just here. I've talked to other preachers and they're experiencing the exact same thing. That virus has really been tough this winter. There's not a lot of people here this morning. Here in this town, there's not a lot of people here. Last I looked, the population of Mackville was about 200. Not a lot of people here, but I can guarantee you that there are people around here without Jesus Christ. The best way to reach them is friends telling friends. Folks, as I close this morning, I look out over this congregation and I see people who are eager to serve God. And one thing I have found about Mackville Christian Church is this is a loving group of people. I think that you've shown you want to seek Christ. You want to do right. My question is, how important is this time to us? How important is it to be part of the group of assembly? Hopefully our worship is the time that you're going to hear the word preached. But how important is Christ in your lives? What's your willingness to put Jesus in your life? Never waver in that. And never waver in your faith to share Christ. Ask God to lead you. Ask God